The night was thin and cold on the highway, the kind that made engines sound louder and thoughts sharper. And Marcus Hale felt it in his bones as his bike cut through the dark, the headlight carving a narrow tunnel ahead, while memories pressed in from the sides. And it was there, at a dead gas station with flickering lights and a broken soda machine, that the kid stepped out from the shadows with dirt on his face and fear in his eyes. A runaway no older than 16, skinny arms wrapped in a torn hoodie. And when Marcus slowed, hand loose on the throttle, the kid didn't beg or shout. He just spoke low and steady like he'd practiced it 100 times, saying, "They're watching your wife." And for a second the world tilted because Marcus had buried his wife 2 years ago after a drunk driver ran a light, or so the report said, and the club had watched him crack and harden in the same week. And the kid saw the flicker in Marcus's eyes and added, "The woman you still go home to, the one who keeps the light on." And Marcus felt the old scar pull tight across his ribs as he cut the engine and listened, the empty highway humming around them. The kid explaining in broken pieces how he slept behind the cannery and saw men in a black SUV parked across from a small house near the river, how they took pictures and made calls, how one of them wore a badge he didn't trust. And Marcus knew then this wasn't a lie because lies rushed. And this kid didn't, and the night ride back felt longer than the ride out as Marcus pushed the bike hard, the wind tearing at him, his mind flashing to quiet mornings with Anna's coffee cup still on the counter, to the promise he made at the grave that he'd keep what little family he had left safe, no matter the cost. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Marcus didn't go straight home, not yet, because experience had taught him that panic killed plans. So he turned off at the gravel road and called the clubhouse, his voice calm but tight as he told them to lock it down. No noise, no lights, and to get Doc awake. And when he finally rolled up near the river house, he didn't park close. He watched from the trees and counted, saw the SUV's dark shape, saw the man inside scrolling his phone, saw another across the street pretending to smoke, and anger rose but stayed leashed because Marcus Hale had learned the hardest lesson young. That fury was a tool you sharpened, not a fire you fed. And as he watched, a quiet memory surfaced of Anna laughing on this porch, saying he worried too much, and the guilt hit him fresh because he'd brought this life to her door whether she wanted it or not, and the kid's warning burned like a match. He slipped away without being seen and rode to the clubhouse, the old brick building humming with generators and low voices, the smell of oil and coffee mixing in the air. And when Marcus walked in, the room stilled the way it always did, because he wasn't loud, but he was final, a man who carried decisions like weights and never put them down. And he looked at the faces that mattered. Men who'd bled with him and buried brothers. Men who knew the cost of loyalty. And he said simply that someone was watching family. And that word family landed heavy, bringing back ghosts for everyone in the room. And though this was the first move of a long night, it felt like the first note of a song they all knew, the one that never ended clean. Marcus took the kid to the back room, gave him food and water, and listened again, pressing for details without scaring him, noting the badge, the plates, the times, and when the kid finished, Marcus nodded and said he did right, and the kid's shoulders dropped like he'd been holding his breath for days, and Marcus felt something old and dangerous wake up inside him. Not the rage, but the promise, the one he made to his brothers and to Anna and to himself, that if someone crossed the line into his home, he would answer in a language they understood. He sent a quiet message to a friend to the hospital to check if any reports had been filed. He told the lookout to pull traffic cams, and he stood alone for a minute by the clubhouse door, the night air cooling his face, wondering who would be stupid enough to poke the club this way, and why now. And as engines idled outside and men moved with purpose, Marcus made a decision no one expected: not to strike first, not to vanish, but to invite the watcher to blink, because sometimes the strongest move was to let the enemy think they were ahead. And as the night deepened and the road called again, Marcus Hale swung a leg over his bike, knowing this was the trigger, the moment after which nothing stayed the same. And he rode out with a steady hand and a clear plan, carrying the weight of his past and the promise of what he would protect, even if it cost him everything. The clubhouse felt smaller once the doors were shut, the kind of tight that made men speak softer and listen harder. And Marcus stood at the center table with his hands flat on the scarred wood, eyes moving from face to face as the brothers gathered in, each one carrying their own history into the circle. There was Brick the enforcer with shoulders like concrete and a jaw that never stopped grinding. There was Eli the strategist who wore clean glasses and kept numbers in his head better than names. There was Doc the medic with tired eyes and steady hands who'd stitch more club skin than any hospital ever would. There was Roach the lookout, thin and restless, already tapping into traffic feeds on a laptop. And there was Lena the club's fixer and voice, a widow who handled money and quiet favors and knew how the city really breathed. And Marcus didn't waste time, because time was what the watchers wanted. He laid out the kid's warning. The SUV, the badge that didn't feel right, and the photos. And when he said the word family, the room shifted. Brick swore once and went quiet. Doc rubbed his temple like he felt a headache coming, and Eli leaned forward asking calm questions about plates and patterns and timing, because panic was a luxury they didn't afford. Marcus listened, nodded, answered, and then said what he needed to say: that they were not hitting anyone tonight, not burning anything down, not scaring Anna into thinking this was normal. And Brick pushed back hard, saying waiting got people hurt, saying he'd lost a cousin that way. And Marcus met his eyes and didn't flinch, saying waiting wasn't the same as freezing, saying they'd move smart and together. And the words landed because Marcus had earned them over years of choosing the harder road and owning the cost when it went bad. Roach pulled up feeds and showed the SUV had made the same slow loop 3 nights in a row, always between 10 and midnight, always switching drivers. And Eli noticed the timing lined up with a shipment that had gone missing last month. One the club had passed on, but knew about: a gray market run tied to a man named Calderon who wore a badge by day and ran crews by night, a corrupt cop who smiled for cameras and soul protection like candy. And the room got colder because Calderon was careful and connected and didn't bluff. And Lena said quietly that Calderon had been sniffing around the river properties, that he wanted leverage, not noise, that watching family was how he squeezed men into mistakes. And Marcus felt the plan forming not as a spark, but as a weight settling into place. They broke into motion without shouting. Brick and another brother went to quietly reinforce the river house. Not to be seen, but to be there. Doc prepped a bag and called a favor at the clinic to keep a bed open. Roach set alerts and mapped exits. And Eli drafted a simple script for the night ahead. What to do if the SUV moved, what to do if it split, what to do if the badge flashed, because details saved lives when nerves failed. Marcus took a moment alone with Lena, asking her to move funds and call in a debt, something small but visible, and she understood, saying sometimes you show your hand just enough to make the other guy blink. And when she asked if Anna knew, Marcus shook his head and said not yet, not until he had something solid, because fear without answers was cruel. They brought the kid into the room and gave him a clean jacket, asked him his name, Jonah, and told him he could stay as long as he wanted, no strings. And Jonah nodded like he didn't trust kindness but needed it anyway. And Marcus told him he did good, that he mattered, and Jonah's eyes shined before he looked away. embarrassed by hope. As midnight crept closer, engines rumbled outside but stayed low. The brothers took positions like they'd done 100 times before, not eager, just ready, and Marcus rode slow toward the river. Not straight at the house, but wide, checking reflections, counting steps, feeling the old calm settle in, the one that came right before choices that couldn't be undone. The SUV showed up on time like it had an appointment, rolled to its usual spot, lights off, and Marcus watched from a shadow as Brick sent a single text, "In place," and Roach confirmed Calderon's unit badge matched records, but his plates didn't. The lie tucked right under the truth, and Eli's voice came through the earpiece steady as a metronome, reminding them the goal was information and pressure, not blood. Marcus made the move no one expected again. He walked out in the street alone, helmet off, hands open, and stood where the streetlight cut his face clean, and the SUV door cracked. A man stepped out with a badge. He flashed too fast, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes, calling Marcus by name like they were old friends, and Marcus answered polite, asking if he could help, and the talk stayed calm and poisonous. Calderon hinting about missing shipments and public safety and mistakes that happened to families. Marcus listening and giving nothing, and all the while the brothers watched from angles Calderon hadn't counted, cameras rolling, plates logged, faces saved, and when Calderon finally said this could all go away if Marcus made the right call. Marcus said he'd think about it, and that was enough to make Calderon smile thin because he'd wanted fear, not patience. The SUV pulled off slow, too slow, and Marcus let it go because chasing was what Calderon expected, and back at the clubhouse the tension didn't break, it hardened into something sharper, the kind that cut clean when the time came, and Eli laid it out, that Calderon would push harder now, that waiting had bought them a window, but not peace, that someone inside the system might already be leaning. And Marcus nodded and said they'd find the pressure point because bullies always had one. And as the night ended and dawn threatened the edges of the sky, Marcus sat with the brothers and felt the weight of what was coming, the unavoidable collision forming just out of sight. And he knew the club would move together when it hit, loyal and scarred and ready to pay the price, because family was not a word they used lightly, and someone had crossed that line. The move came at dawn when the city was half awake and careless, and Marcus felt it before the phone rang, because the air had that wrong taste, the kind that followed men who didn't knock. And when Lena called with a tight voice saying Calderon's people had grabbed Jonah near the cannery and left a message carved into the quiet, Marcus closed his eyes once and let the anger pass through him like a wave he didn't fight, because panic would only feed the trap. And the brothers gathered fast. Brick already pulling on gloves, Doc swearing under his breath, Eli asking for locations and times and patterns, and Roach saying traffic cams went dark for 90 seconds like someone had planned it. And Marcus said steady and clear that this was it, that Calderon had chosen a hostage not because the kid mattered to his ledger, but because the kid mattered to them. And that meant Calderon thought he'd found their lever. They split clean and fast, two teams moving without speeches, one to find Jonah, one to trace the money trail Lena had nudged the night before, because pressure worked both ways, and Marcus rode with Brick toward a warehouse by the rail spur where Calderon's crews liked to feel invisible, the bike's engine a low growl under the rising sun, Marcus's mind flashing to Anna's porch light and to the promise again. And when they arrived, they didn't rush the door. They watched and listened. Brick's jaw tight as he whispered he could smell bleach and fear, and Marcus knew they were close. Inside, voices argued, not loud, just sharp, and Marcus caught a name he didn't like, Eli's, which meant someone had talked, and the realization settled cold that Calderon had a line inside the system that reached closer than they thought. At the same time across town, Lena's call came through saying the funds she'd moved had bounced a shell account tied to Calderon's badge, a sloppy move for a careful man, which meant pressure was working, but also that he'd escalate. And Marcus made the call to move now, not later, because waiting would only cost Jonah more. They went in fast and quiet, Brick taking the left, Marcus the right, voices cutting off as fear replaced bravado, and Jonah was there tied to a chair, eyes wide but steady, blood at his lip, and Marcus felt a surge of something close to relief, but kept it locked down as Brick secured the room, and Doc's voice crackled, saying the second team had eyes on Calderon, leaving a courthouse with a smile that didn't match the timing. Jonah shook when Marcus cut him free, whispering that a man with a familiar voice had asked questions about routes and names, had promised him food if he talked, and Marcus felt the betrayal land like a punch, because familiar voices meant brothers. And when Jonah said the man wore club colors under his jacket once, Marcus knew which brother it was before the name came out. A mid-level runner named Pete who'd been sweating debts and making excuses for months. Marcus didn't curse, didn't shout, he just told Brick to get Jonah safe and told Roach to pull Pete's last pings. And the club moved like a single thought toward the hard truth that loyalty wasn't a badge you wore forever. It was a choice you made every day. They caught Pete at a roadside diner with a half-eaten plate and shaking hands. And when Marcus sat across from him, Pete couldn't meet his eyes, talking too much about pressure and mistakes and how Calderon had promised protection. And Marcus listened because listening mattered, because understanding the why didn't excuse the what, but it explained the damage. And when Pete finally broke and said Calderon had something on Anna, photos, schedules, Marcus felt the room narrow to a point, and he made the shocking decision then, the one no one expected, not to end Pete in that booth, not to turn him loose either, but to use him to feed Calderon a truth wrapped in a lie, because the clean path had closed and only the hard one remained. Eli pushed back over the comms, saying it was too risky, saying Calderon would smell it. And Marcus said Calderon already smelled blood, that the only way through was straight at the heart, and Doc added quietly that Jonah needed a hospital and that time mattered. And Marcus nodded and said do it, because sacrifices always ask their price up front. They staged the meet in Old Way Station, where sound carried and exits were limited, Pete wired and shaking, Brick hidden in the shadows, Lena moving money like bait, and Marcus walked in alone again, because some habits were hard to break, and because leaders took the front when the ground was thin. Calderon arrived late, smug and careful, eyes scanning, badge bright, and when Pete spoke the lie about routes and names, Calderon smiled, the real one this time, until Marcus said Pete was done and that the game had changed, and Calderon's smile died as sirens wailed in the distance, not because of a call, but because Lena had pulled the pin on the shell account with a reporter watching, and the collision hit hard and fast, Calderon drawing, Brick moving, a shot cracking the air and taking Brick. High in the shoulder, Doc already on the move, and Marcus stepping in close to Calderon, knocking the gun away, telling him it was over, and Calderon laughing even then, saying men like Marcus always lost something they loved. The sacrifice came quiet, Pete breaking cover to shove Calderon's arm down as another shot rang out, Pete taking it and falling, eyes wide with something like relief, and the chaos froze for a second as boots thundered closer and Calderon was cuffed by his own people under camera's eye, the truth spilling too fast to contain. Pete died on the pavement with Marcus holding his hand, saying sorry and thank you in the same breath. And Brick lived because Doc was good and fast, and Jonah lived because the club had chosen him when no one else did. And as the sun climbed and the way station emptied, Marcus stood in the aftermath feeling the cost settle deep, knowing the confrontation wasn't just fists and guns, but choices that cut both ways, and that even when you won, you paid, and this was the price of family, taken and given in the same moment, with no clean edges and no easy forgiveness. The fallout didn't come with sirens this time. It came slow and heavy like weather rolling in, and Marcus felt it in the days after as much as in the night itself. Brick laid up in a hospital room smelling of antiseptic and coffee. Doc sleeping in a chair because he didn't trust machines more than his own eyes. Jonah wrapped in a blanket at the clubhouse, watching morning light hit dust motes like he wasn't sure it was allowed. And Calderon in a holding cell, staring at a wall while as carefully. Stacked lies collapsed under cameras and paper trails, and one reporter who didn't look away. And Marcus moved through it all carrying the weight of every decision, knowing justice was never clean and never free. The confrontation everyone expected didn't explode. It tightened because Calderon still had friends and favors and men who believed badges more than scars. And the club met again in the quiet, voices low, counting costs and planning the long game. Lena laying out how the money freeze would hurt but not kill. Eli mapping the legal angles like a battlefield where words cut deeper than knives. And Marcus listening, his mind drifting to Pete's last breath and the way forgiveness came too late too. Mattered to the dead, but still mattered to the living. When Calderon was brought into an interrogation room with bright lights and a camera that never blinked, Marcus didn't go to gloat. He went to finish, sitting across the table calm and tired, telling Calderon that the street remembered and that men like him didn't vanish. They eroded one truth at a time, and Calderon sneered until Marcus slid the photos across the table, not of Anna, but of Calderon's own deals. Dates and times and names, the leverage reversed, and for the first time Calderon's eyes flickered because power hated mirrors. Outside, the club protected what mattered, Brick healing slow but stubborn, joking through pain, Jonah starting school paperwork with Lena's help, learning what it felt like to be counted, and Anna finally being told the truth, sitting with Marcus on the porch as the river moved steady and indifferent, her hand tight in his as he said he should have told her sooner, and she said she knew the risks when she chose him. That fear shared was lighter than fear alone, and Marcus felt something in his chest eased just enough to breathe. The cost still came, a rival crew testing edges, a judge asking questions, whispers that didn't die easy, and Marcus answered each with patience sharpened by loss, choosing when to push and when to wait, because leadership wasn't about winning loud, it was about surviving honest. The final reckoning arrived, not with a gunshot, but with a sentence. Calderon led away in cuffs while cameras flashed, his name stripped of shine, and the club watched from a distance. No cheers, just a shared exhale, because victory tasted like metal and ash and the knowledge that tomorrow still demanded vigilance. At Pete's funeral, they stood in a line, bike silent, the road empty, and Marcus spoke few words because too many would lie, saying Pete made a choice at the end, and that choices mattered, and the wind carried it where it needed to go. As night fell, Marcus took a long ride alone, the highway open, the engine steady, thinking about loyalty as a promise renewed daily, about justice as a road without a finish line, about redemption as something you built by what you protected next. And when he turned back toward the clubhouse, the light was on, family waiting, the cost paid and the work continuing, and Marcus Hale rode on, scarred and loyal, doing what no one expected again, choosing to stay.